Hi, my name is Ann V. Brady, and I will be reading an excerpt from my book, A New Beginning: The Story of My Adoption, Life, and Service, illustrated by Eric C. Brady. I was delivered at Tewksbury Hospital and Infirmary on August 31st, 1954. According to my file, I suffered from failure to thrive. My birth mother put me up for adoption on September 8th, 1954. I lived in a hospital for a year because social services wanted to put me in a foster home instead of an orphanage. My birth mother told the social worker that my father's name was John H. She described him as 28 years old, 5'7" Irish, reddish curly hair, single, living with his widowed mother. She said he was from Providence, Rhode Island, and drove a bakery delivery truck. The social worker wrote about how my brother was confused and having trouble getting settled. My brother stayed in the system, going back and forth between the orphanage and foster homes until he aged out of the system at the age of 18. I read my file quickly and I was angry because I thought my birth mother was weak. I called my mom one night and discussed my feelings with her. She helped me see that my birth mother was strong. She took care of her dying mother, went back to school, became an LPN, and had to deal with other people trying to run her life. Another reason my birth mother Helen didn't like Aunt Agnes was because she didn't want her to have fun or go out with men. I read that I was in two different foster homes before being put in Nazareth Home for Children in Jamaica Plains. The home was run by nuns. The social workers visited the first home of a young couple. She decided to pull me and other children from the home because of neglect. She felt that the couple took care of the children's basic needs, but they were emotionally distanced from the children. They ignored the children and didn't interact with them. The second home, all the children were removed because the foster mother miscarried. While I was in the foster care system, I went to the hospital at least twice. Once because they thought I broke my leg, but I didn't. I was also sent to the hospital because I had measles. In 1957, my parents petitioned to adopt me. I was to live with them on a probationary basis for 6 months to see if we were a good fit. Before I was adopted, I had to go for a physical. I noticed in my file that the doctor thought I was retarded because I let him examine me without a fuss. I think he wouldn't have felt the same way if he knew that my first year of life was spent living in a hospital. I told my mom that I had been in a hospital. She was surprised. The social services had never told them about me being hospitalized. I do know that my birth mother tried to get me back when I was 3. No attorney would help her, and they thought she was crazy. The reason they thought she was crazy was because she wasn't sorry about having 2 children out of wedlock. While I don't think my birth mother was crazy, I'm glad she didn't get me back. She was under constant pressure by her aunt, her father. She and her aunt were constantly moving. The social workers were always trying to find her and her aunt. I was adopted on September 18th, 1958. While reading my birth mother's description of my birth father, I assumed that his last name was Houlihan. I eventually verified that was indeed the name given by my birth mother. I wrote a letter to the medical records section of Tewksbury Hospital and Infirmary requesting my birth mother's medical records as pertained to my birth. They said they would comply if they had a court order from a probate judge ordering them to send the records to me. I contacted the Middlesex probate judge and requested a court order for the hospital to release her records to me. I was contacted by one of her law clerks. He informed me that he would write the court order, and to ensure that they complied, he would have the hospital send the records to him. He said he would then send the records to me directly. I had asked for the records because, having been adopted, I had no idea of my family's medical history. I didn't know if cancer, heart problems, or other genetic diseases ran in my family. I was fortunate that the law clerk sent me a letter with my mother's medical records. I called him and thanked him. One thing that surprised me was when I told my mom about my birth brother. She said, "Now that you know, you can stop searching." I think my mom was worried that I was trying to replace my family with my birth family. That was never my intent. I was curious to know who my birth mother was, and now I was curious to find my birth brother. I feel you can never add too many people to your family and to your friends. Love expands and should be inclusive. Our routine was pretty much the same every day. Waking the boys up, telling them to get dressed, making breakfast, getting dressed myself. Then I would take Eric to a care provider, Charlotte, and Mike to military daycare. Charlotte would make sure Eric would get on the bus to school. Then I would walk across the street to work. Sometime after I arrived at clinical investigations, both Colonel L and Colonel S, old bosses of mine, arrived. I was glad to see them. I enjoyed working in TB. I was interested in training in DNA that was run in the lab. Unfortunately, my boss, the colonel, refused to let any military person get training that might help him get better at their job. He only wants civilians to be trained because military personnel are temporary, leaving every 3 to 4 years. I still remember coming off of leave to find my civilian boss upset. It seems there was a power outage while she was under the TB hood processing specimens. She was upset because the colonel knew about the scheduled power outage and didn't tell her or anyone else in the lab about the outage. If she had known, she wouldn't have been in the laboratory when the power was out. She also wouldn't have been exposed to TB. We really had positive TB specimens, but there was always a possibility we would get some. Now she had to be tested for TB and had to be put on 3 antibiotics for 9 months and keep being tested. While I was in Hawaii, I had started taking the basic NCOES course by correspondence. After I finished the course and received my certificate of completion, I started taking the advanced NCOES course through correspondence. Unfortunately, they changed the regulations, stopping the correspondence course for NCOES courses. I had one course left to finish when they changed the regulations. I decided to take the Registered Microbiologist Certification Test. I applied to take the test, and I studied multiple microbiology books. I paid for the test and failed it the first time I took it. I found the book I needed among the books at DCI, a microbiology book that was published by the American Society of Microbiologists, ASM. I studied the book and passed the test. I was certified as a registered microbiologist in research and developmental microbiology by the National Registry of Microbiology, NRM. NRM is affiliated with ASM. I had to keep my certification by keeping up my education in microbiology. I had to submit copies of courses I took to prove that I was keeping up with my education. Now that I was a staff sergeant, I had to attend functions such as dining ins and dining outs. A dining in is a military function attended only by NCOs. Each NCO is tasked with bringing an item for one of two grog bowls. One grog bowl is alcoholic, and the other grog bowl is a non alcoholic bowl. I don't know which is more disgusting. I've seen vodka, rum, sangria, beer, etc. poured into an alcoholic grog bowl. The non alcoholic grog bowl has things like 7 Up, baked beans, Coca-Cola, tomato juice, etc. poured into it. The sergeant major, who is the judge of the dining in, will fine the NCOs for infractions such as the uniform doesn't look ironed, they're missing a medal. The infraction can be real or made up. The soldier is fined has to either drink from one of the grog bowls or donate a specified amount of money to the soldier's retirement home. Most NCOs decide to donate the money, usually a quarter or 50 cents. Occasionally, Ed and I had to attend a dining out. We would ask Staff Sergeant Bradley's daughters to babysit Eric and Mike. Dining outs were fun, and Ed wore a suit while I would wear my dress blues. Ed put in a request to put a fence around our backyard. When it was approved, Ed built the fence. It stopped short of a big tree. M&M would lay out in the backyard, but in the tree was a squirrel that would come down and taunt M&M. Eventually, Ed asked for permission to put the fence out further past the tree. He wanted to make the yard bigger. So after the fence was moved past the tree, the squirrel came down to taunt M&M. Our neighbor Martin said he didn't know M&M could move that fast. M&M got his revenge and no more squirrel. The power outages on posts were usually caused by what I call squirrel suicide. The squirrels would jump onto the transformers and die. This usually occurred in winter. Ed also put in a request to put up a small satellite dish. It stood on a ring base. Post was reluctant to grant permission because the local cable company told them it would interfere with cable reception. Ed had to explain to them that the satellite dish was only a receiver. It didn't transmit signals. They promptly approved our application. One winter night, our power went out and I had to go over to work and put the refrigerators and freezers on standby. Unfortunately, I spent the night going back and forth between work and home, putting refrigerators and freezers on standby, and then taking them off standby when the power came back on. The power finally stayed on and I went to bed. Next morning, Ed informed me that the power went out right after I fell asleep, but he didn't want to wake me. Eventually, I took Mike out of the military daycare and put him in home care with Charlotte. I would take the boys to the on-post swimming pool. I signed Eric up for swimming lessons. Eric took to swimming like a fish. I also took a little me time and went to the hobby shop. I decided to do ceramics again. I would go 1 or 2 nights a week while Ed watched the boys. I made several things, including a Christmas tree with lights and a bald eagle. One summer we went to a horse show. They had barrel riding, and after the competitions, we took the boys to see the horses. We found someone selling rides on ponies, and Eric rode on one and fell in love with horses. Our next door neighbor, Martin, was transferred, and a new family moved into the house next door. They seemed like a nice family. The husband was in the Navy. I was talking to the wife one day, and she was talking about schools. She made the statement that she was having her sons go to school in her aunt's neighborhood because she was afraid that her sons might use the N word. She said she didn't know where they had picked up that language. I was shocked, especially when she followed up with, "There aren't many blacks in the Navy, so her sons hadn't been exposed to them." I talked with Ed about what she was saying. We figured they had to have heard it from their parents. Also, the Navy is as diverse as the Army. Occasionally, I had to pull CQ. I worked all day, then report to CQ duty at 5 p.m. I had a driver who would drive me on rounds to make sure there were no problems. I usually walked home for dinner. I was in charge of the flag detail. The detail would arrive and I would march them out to the flag for reveille and taps. We would play a tape. I would remove the covering, load the blank, and fire the cannon. The detail would raise or lower the flag at the speed of the music. Most nights CQ was pretty boring. I would have to stay up all night until I was relieved of duty. One night I received a strange call. A man called in and said that he was AWOL and his parents said the military was looking for him. He wanted to know who was looking for him. I wrote this all down in my log with the time. I asked him his name and told him that he needed to turn himself in. I said I had no idea who was looking for him. He told me he had gone AWOL because a family member was sick and his request for leave to go home was denied. He told me he wasn't turning himself in as he had a good job working at a service station. I again asked him his name and told him he needed to turn himself in. He then hung up. And that is enough for today. And I hope everybody has a happy start of the week. Happy Monday.